Welcome back to the Techmoto channel and our next video in the Arduino series. In this video we're going to be looking at analog inputs into the Arduino. Okay, so this video we're going to set up an analog input. Now it's really important to understand the difference between digital and analog. Digital will either give you an on or an off, or a 1 or a 0. It'll be one of two states. Analog could be a variety of different states, so it could be a light sensor, it could be a temperature sensor, it could be all sorts of things. For today's video we're going to use one of these. It's a thermistor, a component that measures temperature. And this component changes resistance dependent on the temperature that is impacting upon it. Now, before we get into this video, I think it's a really good idea to say that if you haven't watched the video on potential dividers, that'd be a good place to start, because potential dividers are really important in the whole process of creating a variable input into your Arduino. Okay, so the first thing to do is to create a potential divider. So I'm going to take a 1K resistor and I'm going to put that into my breadboard like this. Now, a potential divider is two resistors in series, so I'm going to take my thermistor. You'll notice that both the legs are the same length, so it doesn't matter which way round it goes, and one leg connects to the leg of the resistor and the other one goes into a random spot on the breadboard. Next thing we want to do is connect some power rails to this. So from our thermistor we will go to 5V, and from the other end of our potential divider we will go to the negative, so the GND, like that. Next thing to do is to take a jumper cable from the middle of our potential divider, so the point where the thermistor and the resistor meet, and we're going to take that to A0. And A0 is part of our analog inputs on this side of the Arduino, so A0 to A5. Okay, so that's our input sorted. Our process will be our program, and for our output we're going to use one of these, a Tricolor LED. Now, Tricolor LEDs have red, blue, green. There's a variety of different types, but they have 4 legs coming out of it. The long leg is the negative, and the other 2 legs, if you put positive power to those, it changes the colour. So we're going to stick that into our breadboard, and these are never easy to get into a breadboard because there's so many legs on them. Okay. So we're going to take the negative, which is this one here, off to GND, and luckily I've got more than one GND, and then we just need to take 2 of these legs off to our input ports. So I'm just going to choose 2 random legs here and hope that it's the right colours, and we'll pick pins 12 and pin 11. So that's it set up. So we have our potential divider here feeding into our analog input, and then we have a Tricolor LED as our output. Okay, now we might have a potential divider here, but that potential divider is going across 5 volts. So we've got GND and we've got 5 volts. Now, the way that the Arduino analog input works is it will give you an integer value between 0 and 1023. So across 5 volts, that's 0.049 volts, or 4.9 millivolts per unit. Now, we don't want to get too much into that. If you want to know more about potential dividers, you can look on the other video that I'll put in the corner of this screen. But for now, that's how you set it up. And I think the easiest way to explain it is to go into the software and actually use it. Okay, so here we are back in the Arduino IDE, and the first thing we want to do is set up our various pins and inputs and outputs. So, INT. And this time we're going to set up a sensor, so I'm going to call it sensor pin. That can be any name that you like. Equals, and we had it on A0, and then our little semicolon. Next thing to do is to set up our LEDs. Now, I want 2 different coloured LEDs for my circuit, so I'm going to put an int, and then again I can put any name in here for our LED, but I'm going to call the first one green, and I'm going to put that into pin 12. And then the second one, INT, and we're going to say this one is red, and that is in pin 11. So that's those set up. The next thing we need to do is we need to set our initial sensor value. So again, INT and sensor value, and we're going to set that sensor value to 0. Okay, that's us started off. So the next thing to do is set up our setup. And we need to set up our various outputs for our LEDs. So we say pin mode green, because that was the name we gave it, and then all capitals output, close the brackets. So that's our first one. That hasn't registered. There we go, output. We have a second one, so I'm just going to copy that and paste that in, and we're going to call that red, which was the name that we gave it. Okay, so that's us all set up, ready to start our program. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to see whether our sensor is actually working. So we put a line of code in here, which is sensor value equals analog read, and make sure you put that capital R in the middle there and make sure that bit goes red because that's a known command. And then sensor pin, which is the name that we gave it up here. Now what that's saying is that the variable sensor value is equal to what's being read from that sensor pin. Next thing we want to do is we want to print that value out onto the screen so we can see what it is. So capital S, serial dot, and then print, print line, and we want to put in sensor value, which is what we called it. Okay, so sensor value equals whatever the reading is on that pin, and then we're saying serial print. So we're going to print that value to our serial printer, which I'm going to show you in a minute. Now before that will actually output to our serial monitor, we need to come back up here into setup, and we need to tell it to start that serial mode off. So it's serial begin, and we want to put a baud rate in of something like that. Okay, so let's just check that that program works by verifying it. Yes, it does. We can send that to our board. Okay, now in Tools, we can go to Serial Monitor. And Serial Monitor will show us exactly what's going on our circuit. So at the moment, our thermistor is returning a value of 514. So that's approximately 2.5 volts coming out of the middle of that potential divider into the analog input of our Arduino. Okay, now if I bring up a video, so let's put that down there, I'll bring up the video of our circuit just above that. So we're running at about 2.5 volts, that's the voltage coming out the middle of the potential divider. If I grab hold of this thermistor now, we're on what, 517, 518. I put my hand on it, you can see that the value goes up dependent on the temperature of my fingers. So we're now hovering at about 560, something like that. Now that's not much of a change. If I let go of it, it goes back down. But you can see that I am directly having an effect on this circuit. Okay, now just to prove that, I've got a soldering iron here, and what I'm going to do is just flick this on, and I'm going to put this next to the thermistor to show you how fast that goes up with a soldering iron next to it. So you can see we're getting up to sort of 700, 800, 900. Take the soldering iron away, and it starts to drop back down. So we know that our analog input is working. We know roughly what the values are. So at room temperature, it's about 514. With my hand on it, it goes up to about 560. And then with the soldering iron on it, it goes up rapidly. Now you could put any component in there. You could put a light sensor, you could put a temperature sensor, you can put anything that provides you with a variable output. So what we want to do now is we want to create a little program. And the program that I want to write is I want the Tricolor LED to be green when it's at room temperature, and I want it to be red when it's too hot to touch. Okay, so now I want to change the color of my lights dependent on the temperature. So I'm going to use an if statement here. So I'm just going to put if the sensor value, making sure you get all your capitals and lowercase right, is over 800. And then we'll open that bracket for our if statement, and we'll say digital, again making sure of your capital W, green is going to be low, all in caps, and then we'll close that one down, and we want to turn on our red light. So digital right, red, is high. The next thing to do is put an else statement in. So if it's not over 800 on that analog input, it will do something different. So again, we'll open up a new one there, and we go digital right, and this time we want green to be high, and we also want digital right, and we want red to be low. Okay, so serial monitor. So we're at 536 here. You can see on the video of our circuit that we are currently showing as green, which means that it's perfectly safe. So if I take this up to over 800, so let's do that with a soldering iron. So let's bring my camera back slightly so I don't melt it. If it goes over 800, it goes red. So you can see it climbing 900. If I take the soldering iron away, it drops down to 800 again. Goes back to green. Let's bring it back in again. Goes over 800, turns red. Take it away, going back down to 800. Goes back to green. So you can see how you can use a digital input on the analog side to measure things, and then program outputs dependent on what's happening in the real world. Okay, so that's it for this video. We've looked at analog inputs using potential dividers to make various outputs light up dependent on what's going on in the real world. I hope you enjoyed it. Any questions you might have, stick them in the comments. But for now, we'll call it a day, and I'll see you in the next one.